Hello and welcome to our Church Facility Management Solutions Security in the Church webinar. We are so glad that you are able to attend and go over with us today this very important topic. My name is Nathan Parr. I'm one of the facility specialists here at Cool Solutions Group. And our special presenter, our speaker today is Chuck Chadwick Jr. As you can see there on your screen, he's the founder and president of the National Organization for Church Security and Safety Management, president of Gatekeeper Security Services, president of the Christian Security Institute, and has well over 30 years of private security experience. And in the last several decade here, focusing exclusively on church and security in the church. So welcome to everyone, and I'd like to introduce Chuck. If you'd like to say hi to everybody and say a little welcome, please.
Good afternoon, everyone. Well, I guess for some people it's noon, some people it's after or before. But thank y'all for having us on the webinar today. And we have NOXM, or the national organization, started back around 2002. So we've been helping churches all around with security and safety issues for a long time, and wanted to help impart some of that knowledge to everyone.
And we are grateful for that. And a little housekeeping thing as we go through, you'll see as you're logged in and in the system, on your little dashboard there, your controls, we may send out some polls that if y'all wouldn't mind participating, that gives us some good feedback. And additionally, if you have any questions as we're going through and just want something answered or want something clarified, submit it under the little questions section there. Ask the question, or in the chat feature. We're monitoring both of those sections, and we'll get to that answer as quickly as we can. So as we go through and we look, why are we talking about church security? Well, because let's face it, the time we live in now and the place we live in now, it's no longer, what would you say, Andy Griffith world, where the worst thing we have to worry about is the town drunk going into his own cell at the end of the night. So, Chuck, I know NOXM has been around for a while, and we've doing it, but can you go in more depth? Okay, why as a church do we need to be considering and talking about, and what's the point behind this? What's the push?
Well, I don't think we really have the time that we have to try to build a case for church security.
Sure.
But with all the events that have happened with churches, especially things like Sutherland Springs, it used to be that people would wonder why you would want church security, and now it's like, well, how do we do it? And security in the church is not a new thing. When we talk about scriptural backing for church security, you look back, our founding scripture is 1 Chronicles 9:21 through 27, where it talks about the men that were selected to be gatekeepers of the church, and they were stationed on all different sides of the church to keep the bad people out, more or less. So this is more of a scriptural role that gatekeepers have been around all along, and now it's becoming more evident that more churches need to look at that and see what they can do. Not every church is a mega church, but this problem of violent events happening in churches is not a mega church. It's not a mega church phenomenon. In fact, our research shows that the average size of a church that has a violent incident in it has a staff of about 4 people. So, you look at that and you say, well, how many members does the church have? Well, we're not been able to pinpoint that information, but if we look at this size of the staff, it's about 4. In a small church that serves probably a couple hundred people, or even just 100 people, you're going to have the pastor, you're going to have probably the music director, you're going to have the children's pastor, and you're going to have the church secretary. So, to think that violence can't happen in a small church and that it's only a mega church thing, which I've heard, it's truly not supported by the facts at all.
Okay. So as we look at this, and as you've done the research and gone into it, what are some of the practical solutions that you've developed over the years regarding the security and safety issues? What should we be looking at?
Well, what we've done is developed a methodology to help churches get their hands around this. It can be a very, it's not just about having a security team with guns. That is not what church security is all about. Our methodology we've developed called the 3 strands of church security, and we give seminars on this type of information. But it follows the scripture in Ecclesiastes, where it talks about 3 strands being woven together are stronger than one. So our first strand is our policies and procedures. Those are those documents that outline what the church has decided to do about different subjects. For example, I'm in the middle of the service. A man gets up in the middle of the service and starts screaming something. Well, Pastor, what do you want us to do about this? Do you want to try to handle it? Because there are some pastors that want to try to handle it themselves. Like, sir, could you sit down and we can talk about this after the service, or they may be that you want the security team to come in and escort this person out as soon as possible. So, policies and procedures are those decisions that we've made in order to, address different security and emergency protocols, I guess you could say. The second strand is human resources, the people that carry out those policies and procedures. You have the ushers, the greeters, the preschool workers, the parkers, and the security team. Those people that are going to run the child check-in system for the children's area, or greet people at the door, or the ushers that will that address calling, more or less being the eyes and ears of the security team. Then the third strand is systems and tools, those things that we buy. In other words, this is where it costs money. The systems and tools that help those human resources, the people, carry out those policies and procedures. So yeah, a child check-in system would be a tool. Radios would be a tool. So those things that allow them to communicate with each other. So that's kind of the methodology that we've used.
Okay. I want to camp out just a little bit in each of those strands. So as we go, so when we're talking about policies and procedures, what I picked up on, and I just want to make clear and expand, how often should churches be developing, looking at these? What should they kind of be looking at? What type of policies, procedures? If you had to say, hey, you need to focus or make sure you have something for this.
Sure.
What would that be?
I mean, we in our resources, we have a master document that we use and we give to the churches, and it is over 42 different issues that we address as far as policies and procedures. So let's take the easy ones. So easy ones, the ones that everybody thinks of first is, a emergency plan. According to OSHA, churches do come under OSHA, and you're supposed to have emergency action plans. So it's like, okay, what are the different types? You've got fire or bomb threat, maybe an evacuation type situation, or you may have shelter in place. A tornado comes, or the active shooter scenario is one where you want to have a lockdown procedures. So you need to have documents that describe what are our plans for this. I mean, that we're not talking about 400-page diatribes on ladder safety. these are very simple documents that may be just a page. I mean, it's not like, oh, an active shooter's at the door. Get out the manual. See what we're supposed to do. It is very simple emergency things that people can look at beforehand and train and practice, I guess you could say. When you have even the most rudimentary child care facility that's licensed by the state, you've got to have emergency action plans. You've got to drill those children on getting them out of the building. So those are some of that's the stuff. And then there's things like, there's a lot of issues involved with having personnel, in other words, employees. So if a person is to say one of our policies is you don't have any personal interest in packages that get delivered to the church. So employees cannot order. It's like one of these things was that these employees were ordering drugs and having them sent to the church, and nobody would open them because they would see that it was from the church, but it was personal. So, right. There's all sorts of different plans, procedures, policies, even coming down to having a congregational policy of, do we allow people to bring guns in churches? Every state is different. You've got to look at the laws in every state to determine some of these policies and procedures.
Okay. So as we look at, we're going to come back to personnel, but as we look at equipment, you've mentioned some radios and you've mentioned child check-in systems. How are you seeing other measures like cameras and access control and those systems begin to be deployed and utilized in churches today? How important or beneficial are those type systems?
Probably,
when we talk.
Sure. Probably the biggest thing that we're seeing right now and over the last couple of years is video surveillance. When it comes to what you're trying to combat with these systems, like video surveillance, well, I want those. What's the first place? I want it in the children's area because I want to catch anybody who's molesting my children. And then also the church wants it there because they want to have a visual deterrent so that if the bad guy in their mind are going to come in, put their children in the daycare or the Sunday school, and then come back and say, somebody molested my child, I want a bunch of money. Then when they look and they say, oh, there's video surveillance here, then maybe they won't take that action. Okay. Video surveillance, it used to be that when people would install it, they would have what they call an asset protection methodology. In other words, or the 7-Eleven methodology is what we called it. You put a camera right over the door where the person would walk in, so you get a real good shot of their face as they walk in, as they break in at night. Right. But now in looking at video surveillance, we look at people protection. Instead of that camera in the children's area looking at the emergency doors going out, making sure that somebody, when they break in the middle of the night, doesn't get something, we turn that camera around and have it look down the corridor so it can see the face of the person kidnapping the child and running out the door. So there's, there are all sorts of different technology, access, like you said, access control, which basically can tell you who's going in what door and whether to let somebody have a key or not. I mean, door keying is always a big facilities nightmare that all churches face. And it usually starts when they're small and everybody has a master key. And so it just goes on from there.
Okay. So it sounds like, just like with policies, when we're starting to talk about equipment, you got to start thinking about it, and it's not a one-time deal that you think about. You've got to put some thought into it, and if it needs to, you need to update and clarify as technology continues to update. Would that be fair?
Yeah. It used to be that we all had that video over our networks was a hard thing to do, and there was all sorts of nightmares about it. And I have to admit that it's gotten a lot better, and but you really have to have a good consultant that knows churches and can help you install those, because if you go to a regular alarm system person, I always say, what is a Ford salesman going to sell you? He's going to sell you a
Right.
Ford. so
Right.
so having an independent consultant is always great to have, that at least can give you, uh, be the customer's advocate.
Right, because I think you just touched on a great point. When we're talking security and you're talking most of the available subcontractors out there, we have to realize that we're talking about security in the church, and we have two almost competing mandates. And I think we'll talk about this later as well. But one is to be as safe and secure as possible, while the other is to be as open and welcoming to all as possible. So it's about making sure all that we do in our policies and the systems and tools we use don't go overboard in one way or the other. Would you agree?
Yes, for sure. Yeah.
Okay, so eh, human resources, and let's talk, because and we know that's going to end up talking about teams as well. But you mentioned several other roles. So
Yeah.
as we're talking about church security, what are these other roles that churches need to consider including and being part of a security program?
Well, if the old security methodology says, you look from the outside perimeter. So let's start in the parking lot. So there a lot of the minor crime that happen in churches is guys breaking into cars in a parking lot during the service. So we need to have somebody out in the parking lot that can, number one, you know watch for people that are trying to break into cars. And some of the researches I've seen, it says that a lot of these deadly, incidents happen. They start outside. So we need to have, guys, and I love golf carts, especially with golf carts with a rain cover on it. That way, our guys can get out there and drive around in the parking lot, and you know just their presence may get somebody not to drive in to look in for a car to break into. Um, so that's our outer layer. Then our next layer, what the greeters at the doors. I want the greeters to be welcoming and everything. I mean, our manual on greeting is a one page, and it talks about how warm and fuzzy you want to make people feel. But at the same time, at that last sentence, before they put down that piece of paper, it says, and if you see something weird or you smell something weird or you just feel uncomfortable about somebody that just walked in the door, please tell security about it or your captain about it or whatever. You get further in, then you talk about ushers. Ushers are the ones that will seat you, or just greet you at the door and give you the bulletin. Again, we're going to tell those people, if you see something, say something. Um, the preschool workers, the people that volunteer to work in the children's department, we need to give them a good education. I think almost all but the smallest churches have some kind of child check-in, whether it can be very expensive and very robust and take care of a lot of issues. But then there's the ones that are operated on a almost like a just a unique number sticker type system to where it's handwritten. So, but we need to give them education about, well, what happens if somebody comes up during the service and says, well, I'm little Johnny's dad and I'm here to pick him up. Well, and he doesn't have the sticker or he doesn't have the token or whatever it is. What are these people supposed to do? Are they supposed to say okay? Are they supposed to call 911? Well, we gotta let them to know. So those are some of the roles that we look at.
Okay. And now let's move into what is on a lot of people's mind. And kind of that, a lot of times when I talk about it, I talk about this is the highest level of preparation that you may want to take, but it has to be undertaken very intentionally. And that is, what about armed or
The,
intervention capable response?
the security team. You have
Yeah,
to say it in a really loud voice.
yeah, the really
Uh,
ominous security team.
security team. Um, well, there are a lot of opinions out there, and there's basically two leading ones. Uh, the ones that say that 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 law enforcement, that active law enforcement, are the only ones that are prepared and trained and can that should ever try to stop anyone. And okay, here's the problem. History shows us that most of these violent, deadly incidents are over in a matter of minutes. And it's like the saying goes, the first responders get there in minutes when seconds count. Well, these guys are tremendous individuals that guard us and dedicate their lives to guarding us, but they just can't be everywhere.
Right.
uh, they can't be within seconds. Every small town in the nation probably has 4 or 5 churches, and you take some of these counties that have, of course, hundreds of cities or little towns in them, but they only have 5, sheriff's deputies. So you can't have somebody in every place. So what we've got to do is, what we end up having is what we call initial responders. You got first responders, EMS, and police that respond to the 911 call. But we also have the people we call initial responders, who are the people who are not already there, and they are, not everybody is wired like this, I guess you could say. um, you know with all this school shooting that's going on here lately, I've heard, should we arm our teachers? And I heard one guy say, well, we shouldn't arm our teachers because they might get mistaken as the bad guy when the police get there. Well, I admit that a lot of the people need to do the run and hide and barricade and evacuate and all that. But there are some that might choose to lay down their lives in the defense of these innocents. And with the
Right.
proper training, these people might have a chance to stop an incident. It, to me, I admit I'm wired to be a defender, and I find the idea that somebody would tell me that I need to go run and hide, and when I'm hearing gunshots and knowing that each one of those shots could be my child being murdered, I could never do that. So I think that if we find those people that are willing and able to take up that gauntlet of a protector, that we can train them uh, to, to 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 at least some kinds of standards, whether it be the police standard, or whether it be private security standard, or whatever. I know it's not going to be the license to carry standard, which is foolish, if anything, to think that, in a lot of states you don't even have to fire a gun to get a concealed carry permit. So we're looking at having people that are trained, and one of the biggest things is liability now. So we can talk about that if you want to.
Absolutely. Before we go into that, this is a great opportunity. Um, it, what I've heard in all of the different levels is train, and training. So in all of this, it sounds like, regardless of the level that you want, without training, it's not going to be effective. Would that be fair to say? Um,
Yeah, tra-
and consistent
training.
training.
Yeah, it's kind of like a three-legged stool. You've got to have the will to do it. In other words, can you, in the end, take somebody else's life? Okay, so there's the will. You've got to have the skill to do it. In other words, you have to train enough to where you're able to do it. And so you've got the ability. And the last thing is what we call, I'm sorry, it almost lost me, where you've done it over and over again. So it's where you've been more or less inoculated against stress.
So it
And
becomes
that's what you,
muscle memory.
yeah. And when you do it over and over again, they the problems that happen when you're more or less shocked. You almost go into a shock system to where boom, something, the gunshots are going off. I've got to do something. Your heart rate goes through the roof, and now you're under stress. And a lot of the things that you've learned, if you haven't dedicated them and trained enough, they go out the door, and
Right.
you're left there standing at just looking at somebody with a gun in your face.
Right.
So you got to do that training.
It's that it's psychologist and psychology. It's that the difference when under stress, your gross motor skills take over, not your fine motor skills. So you're
Right.
not going to be able to think of all, step 1 through 26 in your response, which goes back to your policies.
Yeah.
26 steps may make sense when everybody's sitting around a table developing these policies and procedures. But the reality is, when the alarms are going off, people are screaming, people are running, you're going to get 1 or 2 steps accomplished, because that's what can happen when you're under that stress. So folks, if you ever want some studies on that, the psychology journals, let me know. I'll send them your way. It shows you and talks about that. We have had a question, and this is inappropriate here. In their situation, in the event of an active shooter or an incident like that, they are teaching the run, hide, and fight, which many of us have seen the video produced by Houston.
Sure.
Great video. The question is, okay, is that still appropriate? Is it the only option? Should it be part of your solution?
Yes. I mean, it should be the main solution for everyone except for your gatekeepers, the people. Either if best of all worlds, you have law enforcement that goes to your church. Okay, they would be the best because they do it all the time. Well, for all those people that are the teachers and the students, and because a church really is just a microcosm of a school, right? So all those people need to run and hide and follow all of that, so that it is valid. It's very valid. There's a program called Alice that a friend of ours puts on. It is for all of those non-combatants, I guess you could say. So yeah, that's good, but you need somebody that's going to go take care of this right now. Bullets are going off right now, and you've got to do something.
Okay. So as we so I hope that answered the question, folks, that we received. And again, if you guys got more questions you want to send live, do that, please. Type it into the question. We are monitoring. So Run, Hide, Fight, it's still a great program. You can find that. It's got to be part of your solution. And like Chuck said, except for if you've got them and you've planned on them, your initial responders or your gatekeepers. So as we look, and interesting enough, we just sent out a poll and we're collecting responses. And Chuck, I'm not sure if you see this or not, but the question we sent out is, what areas regarding security, do you want some more information? And right now we've got staff training and policy development in the lead. So that speaks to, again, making sure we understand what to do in the situation. And we did just get a comment that says the Run, Hide, Fight is nonlinear, which is true, correct? I mean, it's making sure you've trained well enough that you can respond dynamically to a situation, correct?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. So we've talked about training, by the way, is at the head. I'm going to go ahead and close this poll right now because we've talked about the role. So, and you've mentioned gatekeeper a few times. So let's talk about what exactly do you mean when you talk about gatekeepers?
Okay. Well, we talk about what are the different options for an armed intervention capable person at your church. So number one, go out and hire law enforcement. That way you have transferred that liability as much as possible over to the police department or the local municipality. That's great. It's going to cost you, I mean, it depends on what side, where you are in the country, but anywhere from 30 to $50 and plus an hour with a minimum of 4 hours. So, that's one cost consideration. Next consideration might be at the other end would be concealed carry people. In other words, they have a license to carry. I don't know what kind of training they've had, but I do know that most concealed carry classes aren't of the caliber of law enforcement training.
Right.
So that's really, to us, that's really not an option. Plus, under the concealed carry crew, where does all the liability fall? Liability is probably one of the biggest issues that a church has in any of its programs. I mean, think about the liability of just the children's area. That what happens more than active shooters is child molestation and sexual loss. I mean, lawsuits for sexual bad people, as you can imagine. What probably makes the most sense to people is using their own people that may have the will and the skill to do this. But now I need a mechanism to off-put that liability that would come on the church directly or on the individual directly. Well, let me back up just a minute, because other than paid law enforcement, you have private security. So hiring a private security company, you're probably going to pay a little less per hour. The training's not going to be as much as a law enforcement officer. A law enforcement officer goes to typical T-Coil here in Texas is 556 hours. A lot of that is on, it's not on the very things that the narrow focus of stopping a bad person, that's what we need in a church. So in private security, they go through training, which is probably either a week or 2 weeks, something like that. They'll go through a psychological evaluation. They'll go through the same type of weapons training and what we call defensive tactics, which is that's the fancy word for our word of the laying on of hands in an unhealing way.
Right. Okay.
So, what we have come upon is taking volunteers and training them up to state security, armed security officer status through the state curriculum. And then we take those individuals and license them as employees of our gatekeeper security services. And then we contract them back to the church for a few dollars an hour. That way, the people are trained for what they're doing up to the state standards. And then the church has pushed off the liability because they've hired a third-party firm out there. And then the individuals, officers, those people that were volunteers that are now officers licensed by the state, they get to be protected as individual employees. So it's a win-win for everybody. And then we've tried this in various states, but we've not gotten very far because every state is so different.
Right.
In Texas, we have over 300, almost 400 officers working for dozens, and I think we have right under 100 churches now that participate in our, you could call it a co-op, but that's a solution that's been custom crafted. It's worked for many, many years. with no deadly force incidences in any of our churches. So,
Okay.
yeah, there are those people that want to go out and do it themselves, and that's great. But I tell you what, if I hear our team got trained by Navy SEALs one more time, I just like I think I'm
Right.
going to puke. I mean, nothing against Navy SEALs, man. Those are the guys. If I need
Right.
somebody rappelling out of the church rafters with machine guns blazing, that's my man.
Right.
But what we usually don't have that in our churches, and so we have to. It's a different theater of engagement. We use things like aggressive friendliness to fill out the bad guy to see what his intentions are. Uh, we use terms like DLR or don't look right to help us identify what may be a problem situation.
Right. So, so folks, I know lots of you are from across the country, all over the place, listening in on this and participating. So, not to brag about Texas, but this program rocks in Texas. So we'll just throw it out there. But you offer training. Folks can come to you and get the same level of training or additional training for their teams. Is that
Right.
correct?
Yeah, right. First of all, you have to look at what your state says. What is your state laws? Uh, you know, uh, Here in Texas, we have it to where you don't have to have a license, or you can have a license, a professional security license, or you can have just your concealed carry license. But there's still that underlying training, no matter where you are. It's like in Colorado. Colorado does not regulate security at the state level. They mandate it at the municipal level. So in the city and county of Denver, you must have, in order to have an armed security team at your church, plainclothes or uniform, you must have to have what they call a merchant guard license with a manager and a certain amount of liability insurance. In the Other places in Colorado, like Colorado Springs, to do plainclothes work, you just need your license to carry. But in uniform work, you need to have a license, a city license. In the rest of the state, there's no regulation at all that I know of. Of course,
Okay.
it's by the municipal government, so you'd have to look at each
Right.
one. Uh,
So that's why it's real important, as you mentioned before, you get people involved. When you talk about liability, now you're talking about getting some lawyers and or insurance people involved to find out what you can really do
right.
in your state, in your city.
And what your insurance company will allow you to do. Different insurance companies some insurance companies are they don't want to have anything to do with the church being a security company, of having armed guards and all the liability that implies. Whereas other insurance company may have some type of endorsement or additional rider or something like that can give you some coverage. Although I don't know of any of them that uh, actually have this as good of coverage as a commercial armed guard insurance policy would have.
Sure.
So insurance is a big deal. But yeah, back to your point is that we give the same training to anybody who comes from out of state, because the training that we give is so well rounded. It's almost like a model for other states to have. I mean, I've looked at other states' curriculum, and it's all basically the same. You have a study in the use of force and what you're allowed to do legally as a church security person or security officer. Uh, there is defensive tactics, which is the hand-to-hand, and you have control as well as survival situations there. I mean, you're not going to poke somebody's eyes out for sitting in the wrong seat, but you may have to escort them out. So, not everything's deadly. So it's the same curriculum that the police force use. It's usually centered around a system called pressure point control tactics, is a defensive tactics. Then you go up the scale. You learn how to do handcuffing. Up the scale, you'll go into intermediate weapons. So now we're talking about expandable batons, if they're legal in your state. Pepper spray. We don't really teach pepper spray because we don't think it has a great use in the theater of engagement of a church. Tasers. We are insured with tasers. We don't teach tasers. Because if you're going to teach tasers or carry one, you need to be trained by a representative of Taser International so that you get the training card. And then you've got to go out and buy the real taser. You don't buy those little stun guns that you give to, to somebody.
Right.
It's got, the real taser is about $1,000. So you got to buy the real equipment.
Right.
And then, we'll do it is training in firearms, usually in handguns, because that's the easiest to conceal and that's what everybody's used to.
Sure.
But, sometimes you could be accused of being too gun heavy. In other words, you think guns are the whole thing. What's not really that's the issue. The issue is if something's going to go terribly wrong and be the most impactful, it's going to be with a firearm. So these people need to know and be accustomed to firing their weapon, drawing their weapon, to doing some tactics. So we teach that also. So we have teams coming in from all over the United States, and they'll spend a week here and train at our facilities. We have our private firearms training facility and our private indoor facilities. So we're very well equipped. And
Okay.
we've been doing this for over 12 years now.
Okay. Want to get a chance to answer some of these questions folks have sent in. Here's one. They've got a church. They've got a uniformed police officer and a cruiser outside
Great.
for traffic flow,
Wonderful.
which is a great deterrent, as they note. But they're always outdoors. Would it be beneficial to institute a walk the campus protocol for this officer, or ask if he'll do that during services?
I would, we get this question all the time is that, well, we hired the guys for $40 an hour for 4 hours, and they sit out there on the street with their police cars, and they get out when the traffic gets bad, and they get back in between the services and get back out. I would suggest that, of course, you're paying for their hours. You're not paying for their authority. Yeah, you are paying for their authority, but not just in the traffic situation. I would have them come in. Give them a special place excuse the pun, but coffee and donuts. Yeah. Bring them in. Bring them. Right. There's your coffee and donuts right over there. And they come in and during the service and walk around and be social and a lot of them. I know a lot of churches that'll have their people, some of their officers, come into the service and sit in the service, but still be available to walk out, back out the back way. If something happens. But yeah, of course I would encourage you to get these officers in. They might even hear the word.
Yeah, I was going to say it's also a great opportunity. Great question. Yes, absolutely. Encourage them to walk around, but also that's an opportunity to witness or to support and to pray for and to develop that further relationship with your first responders. So churches out there, if you're employing uniformed police officers, make them part of your community, even more so. Yes, they're a deterrent. They've got a job to do, but you know what? They need loving and prayer just like everybody else.
Yes.
We had a question about the difference between, you mentioned Alice and that training program and Run, Hide, Fight. Alice is a specific training protocol, correct?
Right. It's put on by you just look for, type in Alice training on the internet and you'll get it. But yeah, it is a specific, almost like a product. And yeah, this guy, he's figured out this methodology and it's a great presentation. And yes, it does cost money, but at least it is a great formula to go by for non-intervention people. So yeah, that is something that you can find, you could go through. But of course, you can still do the same thing without spending a bunch of money. Yeah, you just need somebody to champion the cause and collect the information and give the training to the people on how to. One of the things that kind of comes up is how do we lock our doors? I know this is kind of jutting off into the equipment section real quick, but that's one of the main things that we see is there a way to lock the doors of the Sunday school rooms from the inside? And there's all sorts of different, other than just regular door locks. There's all sorts of different devices that you can do without having to change the hardware. Uh, because, in an active shooter incident, until Sandy Hook, they did a study of active shooter incidences from 2000 to 2010. So Sandy Hook, I think, was in 2012, so wasn't in this. Well, the weird thing about it was that no active shooter had ever breached a locked door. In other words, the active shooter is so intent about getting this done before the cops get there. They'll go and they'll jiggle a doorknob, and if they can't hear or don't have any suspicion that somebody's in there, then they'll keep going. Now, in Virginia Tech, which was included in this study, yeah, he did come back because he knew that there were some people in there. So,
Okay. So making sure that you've got a way to secure the door that doesn't violate fire code.
fire code, yeah, that's a big
Because
deal.
that's important, and that's where you develop that relationship with your fire marshal. They can help out.
The
But
authority
that's
having jurisdiction.
yep, AHJ. Um, Great question. Law enforcement has arrived. How would you ensure the church security is not misidentified as the active shooter? I know how I would answer that. How would you answer that?
Well, I was just with somebody yesterday answering that question, and it's not rocket science. It's don't have the gun in your hand pointed at the cops when they get there. It's kind of rudimentary, but okay, it's happened. I mean, okay, I understand the fear that comes along with that idea that I'm going to be standing there with a gun when the cops get there. Well,
Mhm.
the idea is not to have that happen. Don't have your gun in your hand. Uh, we do have different solutions, like if they throw on active shooter vest that says security all over it. Uh, Obviously having nothing, no kind of identification is not good. If you ask a policeman, what would he do? Usually they say, I would take my badge off and I hold it in the air and say police. And if I have to have the gun in my hand, then I would have it down, I would drop the gun for sure. So that's the way it works.
Okay.
But I will tell you that in most of the active shooter drills that I have seen or heard of, to where they do scenarios. There was one, I won't mention what their name was, but they're very well known. They had a big active shooter incident happen there. Well, they had guys, they set it up, the police department set it up to where they're going to call an active shooter at this church. And they did. So the cops were coming to the church thinking there's another active shooter. So it's very viable. But they stopped them at the perimeter and said, this is a drill. Now that we've got you all jacked up and
Yeah.
you're just heart beating out their chest. And they gave them airsoft guns and said, go in. And they had it all set up to where they had groups of people that were being held hostage. They had shooters. They had good guys. They had good guys with these banners that they wore that said, probably more or less like, I'm security, don't shoot me type stuff.
Right.
And guys with badges, guys with badges with chains around their neck, and the cops shot everybody. I mean, it was just like, it was so intense that your heart's racing, your mind, your tunnel vision, everything else happens. It didn't make any difference. They all got shot. So
No.
what am I saying? Am I saying not to try to save your children? No. I mean, I'm going to go and stop the bad guy, and if I get shot, at least I saved 20 kids, and maybe the cop shot me. But just because you get shot doesn't mean you're going to die.
Right. And basically obey all commands, lower your weapon,
Right.
make yourself not the threat. Because once first responders arrive, as you pointed out clearly, if you are fielding an armed or intervention capable response, you're the initial responder. When first responders arrive, they're taking over.
Right.
That would be fair. A couple more questions here. What about unarmed teams? What if your culture doesn't support having armed teams? Uh, what can you do? I mean, what
Okay.
training available? How would you approach that?
Well, in security land, we call that a non-commissioned officer. Uh, Now, here's the problem with putting people in uniform. You have you have ununiformed, and then you have uniformed people. If you put a uniformed person out there and a bad guy gets there, who do you think is the threat to the bad guy? It's
Right.
the guy in the uniform. So you put a guy in uniform out there and you say, you're the person responsible for going and stopping this. If you give them the impression that they are the one that's supposed to stop this, you've got a big lawsuit on your hands if something happens and they go try to do it and you haven't given them the train or the wherewithal to defend themselves unarmed. So I probably wouldn't do that. Well, if you're
But
asking, if
you could
people are
train them
asking for,
on DLR, right?
we could train them on basically a non-commissioned officer is going to be observe and report, observe and report. It's
Okay.
not observe and report and then go accost the person and get shot. It's
Okay.
it's
But it's training them how to
opposite.
identify concerns appropriately, and then making sure they've got the tools, equipment to get those concerns brought up and give it to the
Communicated.
right person. Yeah.
So we're going to have a radio or something like that and say there's bad guys out in the parking lot, and you're going to call the good guys.
Okay.
Uh,
So if
but
you've got a church then that doesn't support an armed response culturally, or they just decided, then the next best thing, if and I'm just making a statement, I would say the next best thing would be to have a well-trained observe and report, who, again, well-trained, who knows what to do, what to look for, and how to communicate that.
yeah,
Um,
the number one, I probably wouldn't have them in uniform, so I'm going to make them plain clothes, but I'm going to station them around to where they could observe and give us the earliest warning.
okay.
Uh, and now the whole idea about training for what doesn't look right, I agree. There's certain things that people should already know, and there's not a lot to this training because most people know what doesn't look right. I mean, I was a usher in my church for years, and I would know whenever anybody came in that wasn't a member. I mean, of course, it depends on how big your church is, but uh, you're going to probably know what doesn't look right. Now, obviously, they point to, well, it's the guy in the trench coat and it's 100 degrees outside. Well, duh. There's a whole lot of training involved in knowing that that doesn't look right. The people talking to themselves, and I it depends on what your church. I mean, I was a Methodist minister, son. My wife is Assembly of God. We, in each church, mannerisms are a little bit different, and so each church has to decide what their level of tolerance for disruption is. Uh, if it's uh, just simply speaking up, or is it just getting up and screaming or running up and down the aisles? And in some churches, that's okay because that's the way they operate. So, you've got to make a decision. Usually the decision comes whenever the disturbance becomes more about you than it is about God, then you're out of order. So,
Right. Okay. Uh, Quick question. I think it'll a quick answer. The licensing, your licensing, and the ability to license armed teams, is that limited to Texas, or are there?
uh, ours, I mean, go ahead, finish
No,
up.
no, that's it. Is your licensing limited to just Texas, or is there other states?
Well, we currently are licensed here in Texas. We have been licensed in Oklahoma and Virginia and Colorado, and our whole idea was to do this in every state and save lots of churches a lot of money and give them prepared people. But it's so hard to comply with all of the different laws and regulations that we really have to have somebody who is number one, called by God to try to do this, and it has the determination to where they're not going to quit the first time they get turned down. Like in Oklahoma, I have to have in Oklahoma, to have an armed security team, you must be trained and licensed by CLEAT as a professional security guard. So anybody who has a armed security in Oklahoma is doing it against state law, but unless they're licensed by CLEAT and work under the same model that Gatekeepers does here. Well, you have to have a licensed manager there. So I have to have somebody. We couldn't find enough churches there to make it worth. In Virginia, we got licensed. It took about a year to do it, and then we couldn't find enough churches that wanted to do it. So if the question from the person is, can we come into your state and do it? Well, yeah, we can. We just need somebody who really wants to do this and is dedicated to doing it, and then we can work with you.
Okay. This is a specific question. We may need to take this one offline, and I may do that. But if you hire police officers, and you may, I know you're not, well, maybe you are, but it'll vary between all 50 states. But pretty much, if the police department allows it, can you hire an off-duty police officer, or is that going to be unique to each state? Is each state going to have its own law?
I think, as far as I know, is that every state you can hire police to do extra duty. And I've never heard anybody say that, oh, this state didn't allow that or this city didn't allow that. There's a lot of them that will say they can't work for free or they can't volunteer. But most cities and cities, be in the city government or the county, will allow their officers to have what they call off-duty pay. And sometimes it's coordinated through the city, and sometimes it's just directly with the officer.
Okay, so for that question that I got asked, it seems like you shouldn't have to bring them on as your own staff. To answer that, so because that was their concern.
No, it's just hiring a contract service.
Okay.
It so happens that person is the officer is the company, I guess you could say, just like you'd hire an outside third-party guard company.
Okay. What about proactive planning? We evacuation plans happen after the event, lockdown after, firearms and employing them is after. Something happened. What can churches do on a proactive sense in taking to stop the event from happening? What would you?
Well, you're gonna have the whole gamut of the three strands. You're gonna have policies and procedures that tell people what to do. Then you train the people what to do, and then and give them the right tools to do it. If you don't have a child check-in system, then you're open to problems with domestic custody issues. So that's the way you handle. That's the way you handle that. So to look people up in the National Sex Offender Database. I advise everyone to look everybody up in their whole church through the National Sex Offender Database. It's free, and plus you get to see what's going on. That's proactive. Okay. All sorts of different things that you can do to be proactive.
Okay, so it's as you're looking, like you said, at ways to address and behave. Run your visitors. Some people may disagree with me but I did this every quarter. We would run all of our guest reports, all the names in our guest reports, and cross-reference it with the sex offender database in our community. That doesn't mean they weren't welcome or allowed to come. That just meant that we were being proactive in determining that we were making sure that we knew who was where and doing what.
Yeah, so, and doing that, you helped to protect the church from somebody you may not want there, but that also points out the need for the policies, procedures of what's the church's stance on sexual offenders coming to our church. Give me a policy on that. Some churches will say no. They'll look at the charge And if it is, there's I hate to say it, minor, the statutory rape type charges are a little bit different than aggravated sexual assault on a minor. Okay. So
Sure.
you have to look at the charge, and okay, are you going to tell them that they can't come at all? Let's go down the street, go somewhere else. Or are you going to do the chaperone method, which is okay, when you come in, you check in with Johnny over there, and you're going to go, and you can't go to any of the children's areas, but you can go in the service and go to, so you've got to figure out your solution for that, and so there's a policy there that needs to be set. And just like in criminal background checks, when you're going to criminal background check people for like working with the children, you need to have a policy that says, well, if they had a DWI 30 years ago, they're okay. But if they had one last week, well, maybe we won't have them driving the church buses type stuff. So you got to look at the charges and determine what is going to be the deal breaker, I guess you could say.
Okay. So again, being proactive, and like the question, the gentleman who asked the question said, the stuff is out there, it's available to you. A lot of that stuff, asking your local law enforcement, what patterns are they seeing? What types of crime are happening in the area? Looking at the registries. Those are the things that you can teach and do. And then looking at the people who stand out, who don't look right. Like you said, if wearing a trench coat in Central Texas in August to church, that's not normal. When it's 115 outside, you don't see people in winter coats.
Yeah.
So those are the things. And as we've gone through here, I want to share. You've got a national conference. Of course, you're doing a Three Strands conference in Colorado. So
yeah. In June the 9th, I believe, that will be at New Life Church in Colorado Springs. Yes, that's the place where the big incident happened, where the guy had the patrol rifle that killed several people. And we'll have a one-day conference then. And then in August in Frisco, Texas, at Grace Church, we will have our 14th annual National Church Security Conference, and we bring speakers in from all over the nation, and these just aren't like a policeman that is working somewhere. These are people that are actually involved in church security. I'll be speaking. Dr. Sean Lawler will be speaking. Robert Clamser of Crisis Consulting International will be speaking. He is a great presentation on when you send your people for mission trips. Crisis Consulting International, Bob spends most of his time doing hostage negotiations for people who have sent their church group to, hiking in Iran or something. I mean, it's just like, I'm kidding, but you get the information. Yeah. So that's a great conference, and and then the Three Strands is a one-day conference in Colorado Springs. So we invite everybody to come out, and you can also, if you don't have the wherewithal to do the travel, we do video a lot of these sessions for the national conference. And the National Organization of Church Security and Safety Management, our national organization, can be joined. A church can become a member of the organization and get our access to all of our resources and a lot of the video sessions that are really great.
Okay. I appreciate the time, Chuck, that you've spent with us today. I appreciate everybody who's attended. I want to throw it out there. Do I have any other further questions that we can get to before we come to a close on this session? I'll pause just a minute to wait. If you guys have any more questions, I really appreciate that. I want to again remind you that this was part of our monthly offering from Church Facility Management Solutions. You see our little logo there, cfms.cool. We're your partners in facility stewardship. We exist here to provide for you and for the church everything facility related, security obviously being part of that. So I just want to put that out there too. If you need more information, please check your handouts. All of you have handouts. It's there in your little deal. You've got some presentations, you've got some information, some videos, information on NOC, SSM, Noxum there. Please use it, take it. And our biggest prayer for you and for all is that you guys remain safe and can complete your mission, which is sharing of the gospel. Did have one question come in. Can you give us a quick example, Chuck, of a way if someone is being unruly? How would an usher? What's some of the phrasing they could use without getting hands-on? What's some of the phrasing that you would teach or show somebody or ask somebody to use to ask them to leave the premises?
Well, and de-escalation techniques, which is one of the things that are taught. What one of the techniques is to be, and of course this is very Christian-like also, is to have empathy for the person and knowing that they are going through something and now they're acting it out. In our studies, and this is not part of regular training, but we study the different types of mental illness and how to recognize those things. Now, one of the things is to know that you, as if you're part of the security team, have you been trained in counseling of the mentally ill? Probably not. So don't let church management push all the crazy people onto you and think you're supposed to take care of it. You're supposed to take care of the people that are violent, whereas if somebody's lost and needing a savior, that is the pastor's avenue. That is what he's supposed to be doing.
Right.
If somebody is just going off, you've got to look at. There's so many factors. I really can't give you an answer, I guess you could say.
Right. It's each situation is going to be unique. The main thing is what have you trained for, right? Have you trained, and do you have people trained and prepared to handle the one who has a theological dispute with what's being preached versus the one who is having a manic episode because they're not on their medication anymore? And so if you're not thinking in those terms, that's when you talk church security, those are the terms you have to think of. All situations, from the small slight ones, I don't like the color of carpet that we just put in and I want to raise a stink during church service, to I don't like the way life is going and I want to take as many people out. So in everything in between, you have to have a plan, you have to talk about it, and you have to write it down, have a policy, procedure. These are the things that folks, you've got to do. It's all about being prepared and paying attention to all three strands, because that cord is not broken with all three strands together.
Exactly. Sure want to express my appreciation to Cool Solutions for doing this. I think it's a great service to your people, and wish y'all all the best. You're doing some great things out there.
Appreciate that. Thank you all for attending. You're going to get a survey in a follow-up email. We'd love to hear from you, get your input. And the recording will be available of this webinar. It will be available in our knowledge base section on our cfms.cool website. Join Church Facility Management Solutions. See all of the great content we have there for you. Make sure you check out the Noxum website. It's on that handout that you've got, and it's on the information. Thank you all very much for attending. We appreciate it. Have a blessed rest of your week.